All right, everybody. So we've been talking a lot lately about the discussion around Gen Z men and their political leanings, especially in a post-Andrew Tate world. It really does seem like, much more so than the rise of Ben Shapiro or Jordan Peterson back in 2015 and 2016, that the rise and prevalence of Andrew Tate really got the world's attention drawn to the concept of internet political radicalization happening to the youth. I really did think that the peak would be the Christchurch shooting and that manifesto the guy wrote when he did so, but it seems like the Andrew Tate era was what opened up the vast majority of people's eyes to what was happening on the internet when it came particularly to young Gen Z men. So, as you can imagine, when this article came out called The War Within Gen Z, it caught my attention. I read this a few days ago, so admittedly I've already read this before. This isn't going to be like a first-time reading for me. No reaction on my end. I have a lot of thoughts on it, though, and I really want to talk about this article and the data that it presents, because there's a very interesting phenomenon that I want to discuss that is happening. The boys aren't okay? That's putting it lightly, Prancing Goldfish. I'm going to say some stuff that's going to be hard to hear in this video, but, I do think this article has it down pretty well. Gen Z women are becoming more liberal, while Gen Z men are turning to the right. It all started with #MeToo. Something strange is happening between Gen Z men and women. Over the past decade, poll after poll has found that young people are growing more and more divided by gender on a host of political issues. Since 2014, women between the ages of 18 and 29 have steadily become more liberal each year, while young men have not. Today, female Gen Zers are more likely than their male counterparts to vote, which means, to be involved in the electoral process at all, to care more about political issues, that is to, have any political involvement or care or know-how or information to begin with, and participate in social movements and protests more. Across the board, women seem to be more politically active, more politically informed, and more likely to lean left among Gen Z. While the gender gap is an enduring feature of American politics, at no time in the past quarter century has there been such a rapid divergence between the views of young men and women. The startling speed of the change suggests something more significant is going on than just new demographic patterns, such as rising rates of education and declining adherence to a religion. The change points to some kind of cataclysmal event. After speaking with more than 20 Gen Zers, my colleagues at the Survey Center on American Life and I found that among women, no event was more influential to their political development than that of the #MeToo movement. In 2017, women around the world began speaking out about their experiences with sexual assault and harassment. Gen Zers were then in high school and college, and for them, the movement came at a formative moment. Quote, "Luckily, I had that all over social media to shape the way I look at dating and men," a 21-year-old woman told us about #MeToo. She said allowed her to, quote, use other people's experiences to form a sense of putting a guard up, unquote. A 20-year-old woman offered a similar take, that #MeToo empowered her to stand up for herself. Quote, "I think it makes me less of a doormat." As I've written previously, the #MeToo movement united women politically. Although the challenges women face vary dramatically in the US, sexual harassment is a ubiquitous experience impacting women across the lines of social class, politics, age, and race. 8 in 10 women say that they have been sexually harassed at some point in their lives. And addressing that reality, I doubt it's 8 in 10. It's got to be 10 out of 10, right? I doubt there's a single woman who, participates in society who has not been sexually harassed in some way. The 2 out of 10 that say they haven't don't know that they have been. And addressing that reality quickly became central for women. After the inauguration of Donald Trump, hundreds of thousands of women marched on Washington in the largest single-day protest in American history. That does not surprise me. And then, of course, we've got the big chart. The one that is getting all the attention. Young women, the share of young women who identify as liberal has gone up to it peaked in 2020 at 44% and maintained that into 2022 or 2021 at 44% and has dropped over the last couple years down to 42%, which is very marginal, very small, but is still definitely a questionable anomaly. I wonder why. It seems like there's been a dip in the left-leaningness of young women, but it's still part of a general trend up, and there have been greater dips than this that have been part of the big spike upwards that's been happening since 2012. However, since roughly 2000, young men have pretty much wavered in the same area of 29 to 25% of young men identifying as liberal. It's really like a jagged up and down for them. Here, I'll show you the chart here. You can see it's very baseline for men, how politically involved and liberal they tend to be. And it seems like it's flatlining now more than ever when it comes to young men. And this is, of course, American young men. And for women, it's granted there's this small 3-year dip, but overall it really does seem like it's just going to be part of another one of these dips that continues to cause a spike. Now, why is this happening is one of the biggest questions people have. And I think there's a lot of reasons. The first I want to get out of the way very quickly. The fact is that women have a lot more reason to be progressive inherently, right? Like, there is always going to be a bias against values that are conservative or fascist or right-wing from women because those are not in their best interests, and it takes a ridiculous amount of brainwashing to convince them that is the case. Men naturally are the only ones that can benefit under a conservative system. So that is a big part of why naturally you're going to see more and more young women move left as the ideas of conservatism become more inescapable to like online existing people, right? Like if you're a young woman online, you've seen Ben Shapiro go on a rant about how women should be like breeding machines. So that's going to set a pretty big precedent on how that young woman feels about conservatism from that point onward, right? And women have a lot of experiences that conservatives nowadays are desperately trying to argue against, such as Me Too, that are going to make them more biased to lean more left, right? Now, when it comes to men, I feel as though something I've been saying for years now has finally become provable with data, and not with me just saying it really feels like that's the case, based on my experience and those that I've talked to. What we've seen from this, what this data seems to prove, is that the biggest concern to women right now is their risk of being a victim of sexual assault or rape. That is, without a doubt, one of women's biggest fears. While the pushback to the Me Too movement from men clearly indicates, especially among young men, that one of their biggest fears, to match, is that a woman would falsely accuse them of rape or sexual assault. How many times have you gone into any comment section having to do with sexual assault allegations, and it's just a bunch of chud guys talking about how women make up false allegations to ruin men's lives all the time? And it's like these young 19, 17, 16-year-old dudes posting this, these like Andrew Tate Zoomer fans, right? It's become inescapable to see nowadays. The idea that women could just are at a likelihood of just flipping on you and claiming that a previously consensual interaction was non-consensual to try to ruin you is a very common fear that men hold these days. I'm not saying it's a valid one. I'm just saying that, like, a scary amount of men genuinely fear with their, whole being that any woman they engage with is going to falsely accuse them of some form of sexual impropriety and try to ruin them. And in some cases, it may be a somewhat valid fear. right? Like, if you're a large, big figure, then there is a higher likelihood that's going to happen to you. But if you're just a random guy, then that's very unlikely. Even if it's happened before in cases like that, it's so astonishingly unlikely compared to the millions of rapes that happen like every decade to women. It dwarfs the amount of false allegations. The problem is, though, much like shark attacks, people are still scared of shark attacks when they're in the ocean, even though the statistics are extremely low. People are still afraid of plane crashes when they go up on a plane, even though the statistics are still extremely low, because some people's fears are irrational, and there's nothing you can do to make that irrational fear go away. And frankly, that's what I think the problem is with a lot of these young men, is that for them, they see the Me Too movement, they see what the right tells them modern day quote-unquote feminism is, and they see it as a dangerous movement for their well-being. They are genuinely afraid. A lot of these young men are afraid. It's fear. It genuinely is fear that is motivating a lot of these young men. Whether it be fear of false allegations, fear of loneliness, fear of engagement with women, and social anxiety. It's fear that is motivating these men. These men are scared. And these scared men are being swept up by charismatic, extremely well-funded right-wing pundits that are telling them, I can peddle to you a political ideology and lifestyle brand that'll make you happy. And not just make you happy, but make you the man you're supposed to be. Make you the man that your grandparents would be proud of. You know? Like that kind of thing. Less than 0.01% of rape allegations are actually false rape allegations. Well, the fact is most false rape allegations never go to court because, like, you can't... It's impossible to take, like, true rape allegations to court so many times. Like, you wouldn't do that if you were making up allegations usually. So typically false allegations are just done for the sake of, like, internet clout or some clout in a social space, and no, like, charges are seeked out in the first place. So yeah, a lot of guys are just afraid of being falsely Me Too'd, as they would say. Yeah, also, only 1 in 5 rapes get reported in the first place, too, yeah. Anyway, but while women were rallying together, many Gen Z men began to feel like society was turning against them. As recently as 2019, less than 1/3 of young men said that they faced discrimination, according to Pew. But today, close to half of young men believe they face at least some discrimination. Guys, it may be delusional, but close to half of young Gen Z men think they are discriminated against. Also, I absolutely don't buy that figure, Zan. I do. I absolutely do, the Urchonian. Among American young men, I buy it, yeah. No, I buy it. I buy it so much. Why? Because they can't get pussy? It's not really as simple as that. Something you guys have to understand about how incels don't think that their problems are their problems. Incels believe that the reason they can't get laid isn't necessarily because of like, they understand they have their shortcomings. Some of them are delusional and think they're perfect, but many of them acknowledge they have serious shortcomings. But they don't think the fact that they're getting rejected is because of them, really, or even because of the individual woman or class of women, like group of women or whatever, that is rejecting them. They believe that over the last 20 years, feminism has warped society into such a state that women are having a realization that they can live their lives just as independently as men do. They can pursue STEM When it comes to schooling, they can pursue high-level fields that pay lots of money. They don't have to settle for a man just so that they can have a source of income. They don't have to just be a barefoot, pie-baking, baby-pumping housewife. And so these young men who believe that the pickings are already really slim for them in the first place because maybe they have social anxiety, maybe they have serious, insecurities about their appearance, maybe they just feel black-pilled about the state of the dating world. To be completely honest with you guys, a lot of young Gen Z men are downright disgusted by the dating world established by millennials. Like the hookup culture with like Tinder and like just constant hookups and all of that, and the constant sexual promiscuity, as they would say. A lot of Gen Z men are kind of put off by it. I can't explain exactly why, but every younger like guy of my age group that I've spoken to shares this sort of ick in regards to things like, ooh, here's I can prove this with data. Gen Z hates sex scenes in movies. This data is really good. Gen Z kids apparently really hate sex scenes in movies. A survey of 1,500 Gen Zers has found that more than half of them want to see more content focused on friendship and less on getting it on. Titled Teens and Screens, this new survey conducted by researchers based out of the University of California, Los Angeles included findings that won't be surprising to anyone who's ever witnessed the online trend among Gen Z, or those roughly between the ages of 10 and 24, of decrying sexual situations in film and on television. The survey, which is done on behalf of the UCLA Center of Scholars and Storytellers, CSS, found that 51.5% of respondents want more content on platonic relationships depicted in the media they consume, a trend the researchers labeled nomance. Gen Z hates sex scenes in media. I am part of this too. I really do feel like they are just trash added into media to appease like coomers and gooners that can't like watch any piece of media without seeing tits or like implied fucking, you know? Like it really does just ruin pieces of media for me, and it ruins, like, I want to watch Game of Thrones with my mom, for example, because it is itself a fantastic show, but oh my god, could I never do that for so many, like, holy shit, never could do that, obviously. It's like, it ruins so many pieces of media, in my opinion, from being watched in certain contexts. Like, imagine getting together with the boys and just having, like, just watching, like, a gratuitous sex scene while sitting together on the couch, like, that's in the middle of, like, an otherwise great movie. It ruins the experience of watching the movie. Gen Z hates this, and across the board, Gen Z has gotten far more sexually prudish and, just generally more prudish about sex and reserved than millennials before. And I find that quite interesting because I am also part of that trend, to be honest. And I don't know why that's the case. I don't know if it has to do with like indoctrination or if it's honestly the response I always get is like people who are really sexually explicit make being sexually explicit look bad to them. Is what a lot of like guys my age say about that. It's why they tend to be much more into monogamy and less, like, a lot of young men are going into nofap. They shame the idea of being a gooner. I remember me and my sister just walked out of a Deadpool showing at the theater because of a sex scene. Based. To be fair, I'm 34 years old. I find sex scenes in media to be cringe, partially because of the awkward company, like family or whatever, but mainly because if I wanted to watch fucking, I can go in private and jerk off to porn like a civilized person or go to a sex club. Yeah, it's like, there are places to do that. I'm not here to see that. Like, if they're gonna have sex, just like, I don't know. It's just like, it feels like movies that are going to have gratuitous sex in them should make that the point, you know? And I guess to be fair, Game of Thrones kind of does that because it's like a really gritty, disgusting world that it takes place in. so I get that they just don't hold back anything in what they portray for the most part. And I understand what they're going for there, but, some pieces of media where it's just like, we're just going to show the characters having sex now for roughly 3 minutes. It's like, is that necessary? Do we need to see the different positions they fuck in, like, for 3 minutes? Like, is that part of the story? It's never part of the story, unless it's a porn. No sex scene is 3 minutes. It feels like 10 minutes whenever they happen and you're, like, watching a show that has one with company, dude. Anyway. The hashtag #MeToo movement established a sense of solidarity among young women. A survey conducted in 2022 found that 2/3 of young women believe that, in most or in every way, what happens to women in the US will have a bearing on their own lives, an idea known as linked fate in sociology. But this sentiment was not shared by older women. Only 36% of women older than 65 said the same. This bond has bled into Gen Z women's politics, especially around issues like abortion. A survey we conducted after Roe v. Wade was overturned and just before the 2022 midterms found that no issue mattered more for young women than abortion. 61% said it was a critical concern, while only 32% of young men said the same. In the 2022 midterm elections, all young voters strongly supported Democratic candidates, but young women demonstrated much greater support than men. I'm going to talk about why I think this data is so substantial. What do I think is going on with young men? Well, I'm going to talk mostly from my experience as a Gen Z man, because like a little bit of a retreading of my How I Escaped the Alt-Right rabbit hole story, I guess, to talk about what I think is happening here to young men. Growing up as a younger guy, let's go back to when I was 10. That was like 2009 when I was 10. It feels like, or it felt like, I should say, there was a really big shift that started around the early 2010s in the realm of media and politics. Now, there was always progressive messaging. There was always the idea of what the left stands for being very prominent in all forms of popular media. There was always representation in media, etc., etc. But around 2013, 2012, 2011, because of the popularity of progressive politics, because of feminism, because of just general shifts in the world, like the general world's politics more towards progressivism, in the adult world, I should say, we started to see that a lot more attention was getting drawn to these things than it was before. So you would grow up and you would watch, let's say you're like 10 years old, you would play a game that has like female main characters and like black main characters or like a gay character. And it'd be like, oh, cool, that's nice. And you wouldn't really think about it much because, it just happened, right? And that was it. But then as you started to get a little bit older, and a lot of Gen Z, it was coming into their pre-teen years when this started to happen, all of a sudden it's starting to get attention drawn to it for the sake of political points. Something that from your perspective has always been there, doesn't really affect the experience of the game, movie, whatever it is, whatever piece of media it is that you're consuming, is now being lauded as one of the most important features of the game. Now, it may not actually be getting lauded as one of the most important features of said game, movie, whatever it is, right? But all of a sudden we have these content creators that started to get really big back then, claiming that the left and the media are heavily focusing on diversity and whatnot as one of their primary focuses for making media. And so this idea started to form that if there's so much focus on progressivism and representation being talked about from those making the art we consume, then there must be an agenda. They must be trying to push something. They must be trying to politicize it, when it wasn't political before, quote unquote, was the idea that became popular. And so, much like with the popularity of Gamergate back in the day, what's happening is young men feel attacked by society wanting them to be more left-wing. As society gets more progressive, men are going to be expected to uphold more and more progressive values. These expectations are going to be seen as an attack in many ways. Many men are going to have, random fears that are completely unbased in reality, but they still have those fears nonetheless, and that'll motivate them as well. And I don't know if we're going to see that much more of a shift left from young men going forward, if I'm honest with you. I think as women get to be more and more independent and progressive, men are going to realize a lot of the privileges they had before, including just the privilege of not having to think about politics, are going to go away as society gets more progressive. Another bit of data I want to talk about is the fact that women, more so than ever, young women, are unwilling to date anyone who doesn't hold political values aligning with theirs, especially on issues like abortion and gay rights. So what we're seeing here is a stark spike of men moving to the right, a stark spike of women moving to the left, and for women, they refuse to date right-wing men. So these Gen Z men are going to be lonely, they're going to be single, and they're going to get more and more right-wing. Or they're going to move to the left and grow up, because that's the only way they're not going to end up lonely and miserable. I'm going to be honest, the journey for me went very much the way this data seems to suggest. Eventually, I just found myself getting a little bit bored of the political right-wing shit. I'd ended up spotting quite a few inconsistencies and lies in a few conservative media creators that I watched, and then the Destiny JonTron debate happened, and I mean, he just got wrecked, and multiple conservative talking points that I believed were just decimated by Destiny in that debate, and it made me just take a break from politics for a while. In that time, I lost my virginity, which was big. Like, it sort of took this weight away from the idea of sex. Like, it just took this significance away from it that I held to it, and I stopped putting so much pressure on myself, and, you know, from that point, it almost seemed like sex was flying at me around every corner. But it helped me to understand, it helped me to get to a point where I saw women as just people. That was like an important part of my development that had to happen, and it happened after I lost... Virginity doesn't exist? Shut up. It happened after I lost my virginity, and, yeah, I mean, I just think for a lot of guys, they're going to actually touch a woman for the first time, and that's going to shatter a lot of the Andrew Tate propaganda they've heard. They're going to have an actual relationship. You know, they're going to have to quell their views to get a relationship and have to change their views in order to maintain it, or it's going to fall apart. And I just think a lot of these guys are going to have to grow out of it. They're going to naturally grow out of it. They're going to be forced to grow out of it, because at this point, the rest of society, which is women, are not going to engage with men if they do not catch up. And right now, men's response is to say, well, if you don't like us, even, no matter what, then we don't want anything to do with you, whores. That's how a lot of these guys are responding. But the fact is, tough luck. They're going to have to suck it up and realize women are people too, and they don't get to exist in a world in which men get to have this unanimous privilege over women. A lot of these guys as well have no doubt gone through like 1 or 2 rejections and have like blamed all women for it as well. And that's going to formulate, and that like anger that a lot of young men experience has like moved their has been like fueled into a political desire or movement by demagogues online. You know, my mom said something to me really interesting not so long ago. My mom raised me as a single mom, right? And that's pretty difficult to do. I was an only child. She was a single mom. Pretty hard to pull off, obviously, financially. But when I was like 8 years old, there was a girl I liked at school, and I told her I liked her, and she rejected me. And I came home, and I was quite upset about it. I was like, I hate her. She's so, like, I was just really, really angry about that girl. I hated her for rejecting me. My response to getting rejected was downright anger. I was an 8-year-old boy, and I was just pissed at this also 8-year-old girl for rejecting me. And so my mom asked, what's wrong? And I told her what's wrong and why I'm so upset at this girl. And my mom told me, now as an adult, that moment was really hard for her as a mother, because here she had her child who she loves more than anything and thinks is perfect, and is really upset to hear somebody doesn't agree with that idea, right? It's hard to hear as a parent that somebody doesn't think your child is enough, is worthy or whatever. And it's hard to tell your child that it's okay that other people are going to find you not enough or not worthy, or are not going to be you're not going to be entitled to their reciprocation of interest, And it was a really complicated situation for a mom who's been in the position of the girl to then see her son and feel empathy for her son, who's feeling an emotion she knows she has to correct, she has to acknowledge because it's unhealthy. It's going to breed a toxic worldview and a toxic view on women, but you also have to do it in a soft enough way that you don't hurt your son's feelings, right? It's a hard thing to pull off, right? So my mom told me that story, and I thought it was really interesting. I imagine a lot of moms have very differing responses to that situation with their sons. How many moms do you think explain to their sons whenever they get rejected by a girl for the first time, listen, you're not entitled to her reciprocation. I know it's hard to hear. I love you. You're perfect to me, but you're not going to be enough for everybody. It's just a hard fact of reality. It's a harsh reality that you have to learn when you face your first rejection. I'm sorry, right? And it's how many moms do you think, certainly how many parents across the board, but how many moms do you think are able to say that to their sons? And how many moms do you think feed into and enable their sons' selfishness, their anger at women when they get rejected for the first time? All it takes is that to seed very bad ideas and thoughts around women from a very young age. It's a big deal. It's a really, really big deal. How young boys' mothers respond to young boys' words and opinions about women that are their peers is really important. Some moms love their sons too much that they can't help but enable them and their misogyny as it's like budding and growing. And that's one of the best examples. The first rejection from a girl. How does the mom explain that to the young boy? Does she make him understand the hard truth that, you just have to accept it? Or does she feed into his narcissism and entitlement? Because everybody has entitlement towards the person that they like when they're a kid. Young girls don't really feel this as much, it seems, mostly because, by the looks of things, generally speaking, women from a very young age figure out, they're the ones that are pursued, boys are the ones that do the pursuing, and that continues into adulthood. So you usually don't get as much of that same dynamic. That's also a big part of it. Men are both expected to be the ones to pursue, get rejected, and then, just not cry about it, right? And that kind of sucks. It's a really harsh reality, but it's one you kind of have to accept and just move on with your life with, and just accept as the reality of it. And a lot of guys are just really angry that that's the state of the world, and they blame women for it. Not really women so much as they blame feminism and progressivism and wokeness, which is empowering women to leverage that sort of misery over them in their view. That's funny, Straw Hat Monty 97. But yeah, it's really hard to explain what the phenomenon is for every single young man. But this data really is, it's attention grabbing, isn't it? And it makes me wonder if men are sort of locked in at a certain this level of progressive push from women is a response to the right getting more aggro towards women's rights over the years, the declaring war on feminism and whatnot, that kind of thing. Men will never be victimized by the right in this way. So the question is, will men, young men, ever be able to be imparted with enough empathy to become politically active enough that they care to move over to match women enough in their political progressivism that we've seen them spike into? Or will men continue to see these changes in society as an attack against them? I guess only time will tell.